Okay, welcome back from your break. I am Keith Johnson, and I was asked to do a short talk. And I can assure you that while I am short, I am actually the tallest person in my family. So, but I guess that I'm still qualified to do a short talk. So, what I wanted to do. Well, while people are coming in, let me just ask a question. I'd be curious to see a show of hands of how many people have heard that fiduciary duty is a roadblock to doing ESG integration or intentionally designed endowments. Oh, we do have a few. It's interesting. You can see that from what Barbara showed originally, that fiduciary duty actually has fallen from one of the top issues down to basically the bottom of the list of issues. So I think that's good. What I'd like to do basically today is just to give a little bit of context about the legal principles of fiduciary duty that provide guidance for the investment process. And one of the things that I think is really important about understanding fiduciary duty is that it doesn't give you the answer. It doesn't tell you which investments to make, but it does talk about the process that you're supposed to go through and the criteria that should be included in that process. So as an attorney, I consider myself really lucky that I don't really have to answer any hard questions. It's all process stuff. But to put it in context, basically, fiduciary duty principles are really, really ancient. In our Anglo-Saxon legal system, they go back to the medieval crusades, basically, and come out of trust law when the lord of the manor would go off to fight in the crusades. Basically, he, and of course it always was a he back in those days, had to find somebody who would be able to kind of manage the estate and take care of the family and the children while he was off fighting in the crusades, often for several years. So we have a list of basically, over the centuries, principles that have become the foundation for fiduciary duty. And I think that it's really important if you are talking with someone who is accustomed to the way fiduciary duty has been viewed over the last couple of decades, to be able to kind of ground them in the ancient principles that provide the foundation for it. So essentially, what you've got is, if you are in a situation where you've been given discretion and control over assets, and you're an expert, but you're supposed to manage those assets for the benefit of some third parties, university, beneficiaries, students, future students, basically, there's an inherent conflict of interest. So fiduciary duty legal standards basically supply the concepts that are intended to protect the intended beneficiaries from abuse of power by the delegated agents, basically. And the principles really come in a couple of different categories. One is competence. So the prudence standard basically is a standard that you want to make sure that the person that you've delegated the agency authority to is capable. Risk management, diversification is one of the other sort of traditional standards. And the final one is loyalty and impartiality. And I think that's the one that over the last couple of decades we've really kind of lost sight of. We've gone through a period of a couple of decades, basically, where people that have been in the investment industry have pretty much been bathed in basically a single way of looking at doing investing. And fiduciary duty has, to a certain extent, become made equivalent to basically following what everybody else is doing and turning prudence into a lemming standard. But it really has to be balanced with the loyalty and impartiality to attend to the interests of future generations. So fiduciary duty evolves over time, basically, in response to changes in learning and social situations in society and in the environment. And I'm actually old enough to remember when stocks were considered to be an imprudent investment. That was back during the days in the 20th century, basically, where fiduciary duty was essentially seen as a legal list of these are prudent investments and these are imprudent investments. And you either were on the prudent list or you were not on the prudent list. So we went through a transition which took probably about 30 years in the last half of the 20th century in fiduciary duty, where something called modern portfolio theory and the efficient markets hypothesis basically kind of spread through the investment management industry. And we started to look at investments in the context of risk and return within the overall portfolio rather than the individual investments. And when we got to the end of that time period back in the 90s, the legal scholars updated their fiduciary duty guidance in the Restatement of Trust, which is pretty much the Bible for fiduciary duty attorneys, basically to say that trust investment law should respond to current knowledge and concepts and avoid being frozen so that it doesn't evolve as society and the environment and academic principles evolve. So what we're currently in the process of now, I think, is going through another fiduciary duty evolutionary period in response to the financial crisis and changes that have gone on in the environment and in society since the close of the 20th century. And what worked well and generated both good investment and social results in the 20th century seems inadequate now to deal with things like climate change and income inequality and the growingly complex investment markets and the concentration of investment decision-making authority in fewer and fewer large investment managers. So in that context, basically, we're starting to see that the regulators have issued statements over the last couple of years that are recognizing that the investment function at nonprofits, foundations, endowments basically should be responsive to the goals and mission of the connected organization that it's supposed to serve, as opposed to the other way around. Last year, the IRS confirmed basically that investments should serve the mission of the organization rather than the organization adjusting to the processes of the investment manager. Over on the pension fund side, basically the Federal Department of Labor did pretty much the same thing, basically recognizing that changes in ESG investment, in what used to be called socially responsible investment, and academic research around the investment function, basically, which we'll hear much more about during the rest of the forum, has resulted in a situation where ESG types of issues are tied to investment success and risk exposures, and that can be proper components of a fiduciary's primary analysis of economic merits. And while the Department of Labor advice applies to pension funds, the same legal standards basically apply across pension funds and foundations and endowments in terms of their fiduciary responsibility. So the other thing that's starting to occur is that fiduciary attorneys now have, I think, begun reading the entire state law on fiduciary obligations. They used to only read the first half of the page. Now they're reading the whole page. And that can be helpful to folks that are trying to transition into ESG integration, basically. Most state laws follow the Uniform Prudent Investor Act or Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, basically, and they're essentially the same. And these are the standards that are contained in the Act. And you'll notice that these kind of link back to the ancient principles of fiduciary duty and that are intended to try to prevent abuse of beneficiaries and beneficial organizations at the hands of expert agents. So the standards basically are prudence. It's not a lemming standard of doing the same thing. Prudence actually comes from the Latin word that means forward-looking, which I think is really an important concept for universities where academic institutions where your mission and goals usually revolve around some aspect of trying to help society deal with problems and pass knowledge and develop knowledge across generations. So the other aspects of the fiduciary duty laws that I think are starting to get rediscovered now, basically, are that you can't ignore new research findings. If there is research coming out about the relevance of ESG types of criteria, that's something that you can't just turn a blind eye to. And it's also an opportunity to look for opportunities to improve returns and reduce risks. The final thing I think is probably the most important thing for foundations, endowments, and other nonprofits, and that is maintaining loyalty to the organization's goals and values. The investment function should serve the mission, not the other way around. And it also should do a good job of balancing the generation of current returns with a recognition of the obligations to provide a secure and sustainable future for younger generations that are involved in the intended beneficiaries. So, the Intentional Endowments Network's fiduciary duty working group has tried to generate a series of informational analyses and bulletins that are posted on the IEN website. I think there's a guidance document which is at your table. Hopefully you can use those to address questions that you might be getting from other people in your organizations around fiduciary duty. But with that, I think I'd like to, hopefully this is an issue that we're not going to have to deal with that much in the future because of the advice that we've been getting from the regulatory agencies. But if you have any questions, just let me know. There's a question back there.